Cool, so are we good to start then? Yeah? Okay, excellent. Right, well, hello. Thank you ever so much for all braving the lovely Vancouver winter weather to come out. I know it's probably tempting to stay in your nice warm homes rather than come out, but I appreciate it. As hopefully some of you are not now sitting here thinking I'm in the wrong lecture, but we're going to be talking today about VR and AR, virtual reality and augmented reality in healthcare, specifically veterinary, so hence the title, Animal Realities. So, one of my favourite things to do is sort of watch my flatmate's cat, Kita, just go about her daily business. I actually find it quite meditative. She just sort of potters around doing her, her cat things, leaving those sort of unseen to me but clear as day messages to her all over the place on every surface. And I often think how amazing it would be to actually experience the world and see the world through her eyes. For example, how wonderful it must be to literally look at any particular part of the house and think, well, that would make a fantastic sleeping service, or go on a wanton spree of destruction, knocking things off, sort of the desk and dining room table because, well, it's there and why not? And the more I think about it, the more I realize actually it's possible to do that now, especially with virtual reality. The technology is there to actually make that dream a reality. We can see through Kita's eyes, and that's the power of the technology to be able to do things which otherwise would have been impossible. So in terms of how my first experience with VR and AR, a lot of the talk is going to be perhaps more virtual reality heavy, because that's something that I tend to spend more time doing and have more experience of, but there will be some augmented reality content. But in terms of how I got into it personally, the first experience was probably like most of you. Has everyone tried VR here? Few haven't, okay. But many of you who have tried it have probably tried the blue. Would I be right in saying that? Okay. For those of you who haven't, let me paint a picture. Imagine you're standing in a normal room and then someone puts the VR headset on, and you find yourself standing on the deck of a submerged ship, surrounded on all sides by blue water. There are fish swimming past you, which you instinctively reach out to try and touch, and they actually move away from you, as they would in the real situation. Now, once you get over the bizarre fact that you can actually breathe, even though you're underwater, you then start to take in the surroundings. And the next thing that comes to mind is, well, what's out there? What's out there in the blue? Hopefully it's not a shark. That was my first thought, because I don't think I would be able to cope with a great white coming out of the depths. Even though I know it's not real, it felt and feels real. But the next thing, you just see this huge blue whale coming out of the depths, and it swims directly past you and stops just next to you, so you can look into its eye as it follows you around. Now, for me, that was mind-blowing. As an immersive experience, that really showed me how immersive virtual reality could be. But it's all very well being immersive, but what about interactivity? For me, the next experience that I tried really answered that question, and that was a program called Tiltbrush, which, again, if anyone has tried it, you'll know how incredibly fun it is to... And the video's not going to work. We'll see if the other videos work during this, but it might be that I'm not online. To be able to paint in the real space and to be able to walk around through and generally interact with your creations, for me, just instantly formed a huge Cheshire Cat grin. And that for me just showed how interactive virtual reality could be. And to be honest, it was the only reason that I actually came out of VR and out of the experience was the simple biological need to go and eat something. Otherwise, I probably would have spent the entire day just having fun with creating anything you want at all. And there are some amazing creations that people who are far more talented than me have created. So it's worth checking some of those out. So at this point, I just thought it might be fun. And I think there are enough people to make this worth doing. If you're on the internet, it's worthwhile at this point if you can just pop along to menti.com. Don't worry, I'm not sort of farming your details or anything like that. It's it's all relevant, and you'll be asked just for a code, which will bring you to a quiz. And there are two questions that I think it would be interesting to get your input on. The first is everyone at the stage where they're being asked for their input, or in the code? Okay, I'll give you another few moments. So it's just always really interesting to see what what words come to people's minds when they think about virtual reality. Okay. We'll go for 10 seconds. Okay, awesome. And next, you've probably predicted this. What about augmented reality? I like the Pokemon Go, that's good. Awesome. Okay, so again, let's maybe close this down after 10 seconds. Brilliant, excellent. Some very interesting words there. So I think you can get the results of this as well if you want, but I always think that's quite an interesting exercise. So, some of you may have come along to this talk excited at the title, thinking that I was going to sort of spend time telling you about all the weird and wonderful ways that virtual reality and augmented reality were being applied directly to animals. Now, at this point, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. So if you do want to sneak out, then I won't be offended. Because you may have been imagining scenes such as this where one of our patients is wearing a fake VR headset. But whilst there aren't very many specific examples of VR and AR being applied directly to animals, although there are some, which we'll touch upon, it's more the indirect impact on our furry, feathered and scale friends that I'm sort of going to be talking about today, and how VR and AR are impacting them. Is the flickering bad? No, it's okay. Okay, good. So who am I? My name is Dr. Chris Shivelton Queen. I am a small animal veterinarian. I've trained in the UK, but I've been practicing and living in Dubai for about 6 years. Now, in terms of popular myths about Dubai, there are certain ones that always get asked, and it's probably worth just addressing them now. First of all, everyone's insanely rich. It's absolutely true. Yep, we all get given gold-plated Lamborghinis at the airport when we arrive, and everyone has a maid. So just to sort of put that way. And the other thing is that people own lions and tigers and walk them around on leashes. Now, unfortunately, there is some truth to that. There are some people, perhaps with a bit too much money and trying to impress their friends, who do own exotic animals, and so that does happen. As a vet, obviously, I can't condone that, and we, thankfully, in our clinic, we don't see very many exotic animals. Although we have, in the past, we've had to treat a cheetah that was brought in, which was interesting, but we don't generally deal with too many exotics. So, why am I here to speak about VR and AR? Well, it's technology that is impacting every industry, and veterinary and animal-related fields are certainly not immune to that. Now, who here has a pet? Anyone? A dog? Two cats, okay. Anything larger than that? Anyone own any sort of larger animals? Yep. German Shepherd, excellent. Any larger horses or anything like that? Or anything smaller? What about any mouse owners? No, so generally dogs and cats. Now, I would imagine that if, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but if your pet was to get ill and had to see a vet, you would want that veterinary surgeon to be as well trained and up to speed as they possibly could be to make sure that they provide the best possible care for your pet. And that's where virtual reality and augmented reality, in my opinion, really holds the most value, is in sort of training and education of professionals, which we'll get onto. But what qualifies me to speak about this? Well, as we said, I'm a vet, been a vet for 10 years. I've also been actively involved in the VR, AR scene for a number of years, having attended AWE, Augmented World Expo, several years ago, and have spoken at various conferences sort of around the world since then. And at the moment, I'm actually putting my money where my mouth is by moving out to Vancouver for 3 months, sort of taking an unpaid leave to learn more about VR and AR development. But that's coming to an end. I'm heading home next week, unfortunately. And in terms of level of understanding, so just a quick show of hands, who's actually tried VR? Okay, so most people. And augmented reality, most people have tried that out? Okay. For those of you who haven't, I think the concepts will become clear during the talk, but if you did want to try it out, then at the end, you're more than welcome to come and sort of try out VR. I've actually got a VR headset here, so because once you need to try it really to get it. And once you try it and you get it, then you'll be hooked. That's just a warning. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, first thing is we're going to look at some current use cases or uses of VR and AR in veterinary and animals in general. There are the obvious use cases, but there are also some interesting ones as well. And then we're going to look at where the future may well take us and how we're going to get there, what needs to happen to get us there. And then finally, we'll just spend a few minutes just looking at some of the insights, maybe the tips that I've picked up sort of during my time deep diving VR, AR here in Vancouver. So in terms of VR and AR, or spatial computing, as the collective term you could apply to it, it's much like the introduction, in my opinion, of PCs and smartphones. At the moment, it's a tool. It's just another way for us to be able to interact with data and do things that we haven't otherwise been able to do before. Now, the power of VR is to be able to create and put ourselves in situations that would otherwise be too costly, too dangerous, or just impossible to place ourselves in. Whereas augmented reality places additional information onto the real world, so it just adds more context to the real world. That's sort of the main sort of distinction between the two. Now, VR has been used for a long time in other industries. So in aviation, to train pilots. That's probably the best known use case. Astronauts, so NASA and other space agencies, use VR at a very high level and have been for a long time. Also healthcare. So surgical simulators, of which there are many very sophisticated examples, have been around for a long time, helping surgeons train. These days, I think we tend to think of VR as being very much the headset that you put on and just a couple of hand controllers, and anything else isn't really considered VR. Which I think if we can get over that and accept that you could be using, for example, a haptic instrument, then that is VR, in which case it's been used for a number of years to train surgeons. It's also in many sort of forms being used as a form of therapy, and there seem to be more and more examples of VR being used as treatment for various conditions coming out every single day. So, for example, virtual reality has been used for a number of years in the treatment and management of conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction management, and I can never remember the term, aversion therapy, and also in the treatment and management of anxieties and phobias, for example, arachnophobia. And another really fantastic example of a great use case of VR is in distraction. So in this particular case, and you can look online, there are so many good examples of using VR to distract, for example, children in situations where they're in a very anxiety-inducing situation, like getting an injection. Now, to be honest, in Dubai, we get our blood samples taken every single year for visas and things. I'm going to start taking my VR headset along because I hate it. I sit there and I get in a cold sweat and I hate having my blood taken, which is ironic considering that that's what I do a lot of the day during my job, but I can't stand it. Now, my dad is actually next year due to undergo a procedure that he's very stressed about. It's going to be done under local anaesthetic. He has the option of going under general anaesthetic, but understandably, he's nervous about that because of the risks. Now, we were talking about it, and I initially jokingly said, well, why don't you take along a virtual reality headset and wear it and immerse yourself or distract yourself during the procedure? But then I thought, well, actually, that's not such a daft idea. It's being used already in various other contexts, so perhaps a VR headset is exactly what the doctor ordered and might make the procedure that he's dreading a non-event. Some examples of specific virtual reality use cases in human medicine. So also VR is one which has got a lot of press over the past few years. They're using virtual reality to train orthopedic surgeons in various procedures and how to use various pieces of new equipment. Their results are, they're proving that this works, and they're actually adopted now by many surgical residency programs around the world. Now, this gives me confidence because if it's working in human medicine and human surgical training, then personally, there's no reason why this is not going to work in veterinary. So I find watching this company and what they're doing really encouraging. Another great example is the Stanford Heart Project, which was developed by Dr. David Axelrod, a cardiologist at Stanford, and a VR AR developer from San Francisco called David Sarno. The beauty of this, and I've had the distinct pleasure of trying this out on several occasions, is that you can actually step into a beating, functional heart and explore it from the inside out. You can then see what impact various drugs or disease states have upon the heart. Spending 5 minutes in this, honestly, has provided more learning value than I ever got from reading textbooks and trying to piece together this information from two-dimensional sources. At the end of the day, the heart, as with any organ system, it's three-dimensional. And it's dynamic. So being able to actually learn about these systems by actually sort of exploring them in 3D just makes so much sense. And the results they're getting have shown that the medical students and also the parents and the families of children who are about to undergo procedures, they're finding this incredibly useful because they're able to explain in a lot more detail to the patients and their families what's going to happen, and that tends to help reduce anxiety about the procedure. So really good work. In terms of augmented reality examples, well, there's the EML's project, the Hollow Brain, which is a fantastic example of augmented reality. It's been used to teach neuroanatomy students. And again, if you've not had a chance to try it, then you can go along to one of the sessions. There's one on Tuesday, is that right?
Yes, Emerging Media Lab has drop-in sessions for VR and AR equipment, Tuesdays 12 to 1:30.
Excellent. So well worth going along to because you get to try out all these experiences and see what projects are being worked on. So this uses the HoloLens, which is Microsoft's mixed reality headset. And again, if you've not tried it, there's something really mind-blowing about seeing a brain in wonderful three-dimensional detail floating in midair in front of you that you can then interact with. Another example of a company actually that's doing some using augmented reality in a real practical sense is Accuvane. Now, talking about blood sampling, apparently something like 40% of attempts at needle sticks to take blood samples fail on the first attempt. What Accuvane's technology does is it uses a handheld scanner which actually shows phlebotomists where the veins are. And they claim it makes it 3.5 times easier to hit the vein first time. Now again, as someone who generally hates having their blood sampled, anything that's going to allow the phlebotomist to get it right the first time and get me the hell out of there as quickly as possible gets my vote. And this is a fantastically practical example of augmented reality being used. Somewhat depressingly, although not from my ego, is if you were to Google VR, AR anatomy, veterinary, then rather than there being lots and lots of fantastic examples of use cases, it tends to just be articles that I've written on the subject. Now, my hope is that, for example, if I were to stand up here again next year, would be to say that there are lots more examples of real projects and real use cases. That's one of my aims, is to change that situation. But having said that, there are still some very good examples. So in terms of virtual reality, we have an experience called Easy Anatomy, which has been developed actually by a local studio, Llama Zoo, based down in Victoria. This is one of the most realistic anatomy training tools, specifically for veterinarians, that I've seen. And I've tried out both their VR experience, their AR experience, again through the HoloLens. They also have this available on tablets and traditional screen-based media as well. Now, whilst the veterinary school market hasn't proven to be particularly lucrative or large, there are a lot of students still using this tool, and the company themselves are focusing on sort of other sectors at the moment, but they're still keeping this project going. And I can see why. It's fantastic, and I think if I had that at vet school, I think I'd probably know a lot more anatomy than I currently do. One of my favorite examples, and again, this isn't classic VR as the way we think about it these days, is the haptic cow and the haptic horse. Now, rectal palpation is a vital veterinary skill, and it's the classic image that everyone has when they think of vets, cold January morning, cow. But it's a vital skill. It's, if you're a farm vet, then obviously things like pregnancy diagnosis and reproductive management are incredibly important. It has economic value and animal welfare sort of impact as well. And if you're a horse vet, being able to diagnose colics, which horses just want to break all the time. That's one of the reasons I chose not to be a horse vet. But being able to diagnose colics, you often will have to enter your arm in the sun doesn't shine. So being good at it is important. Now, the animals obviously would rather you didn't practice on them for obvious reasons. So that's where Professor Sarah Bailey's system, I think, is fantastic. And what it does, it uses haptic feedback, so little force feedback sensors, or plates rather, which you put your fingertips on. And by applying force feedback, it actually simulates the feeling of the structures that you'd be practicing on palpating. Again, it's sort of very difficult to explain, but it's something you need to sort of try. But you can literally feel physical structures, but they're not there. It's very, very strange. Now, when I was going through vet school, we were training the traditional way by going out to the farm, and I sucked at this. All I remember was having the blood generally squeezed out of my arm and not being able to feel a damn thing. But after 5 to 10 minutes of using Dr. Sarah's system and actually being able to follow along on the screen the structures that I was supposedly feeling, it all made sense. It all came together. And were I to go out and sort of try the skills out practically with poor old Bessie, I'm sure I would have got a lot more value out of that training. Now, as I said, the reasons for why this is important is A, animal welfare. The better students can be at this particular skill before they go to the farm, then animal welfare improves. Plus, it's an important first day skill. Farmers are expecting you to be good at this and to be accurate, so being able to train and get better at any skill is really important. Now, thankfully for me, I went into small animal practice, so my rectal palpation skills, thankfully for my patients, aren't particularly relevant, which they're quite glad about. Another example is the 4D virtual farms project, which one of the challenges of teaching veterinary students about farm systems is just access to farms. So a lot of vet students these days, more and more, are coming from non-traditional farming backgrounds. So they may actually have entered vet school without any experience of farming systems. But it's important because part of the training is learning about animal production systems and livestock systems. In areas such as Australia, it's even harder to get regular access to farms, because a lot of the farms are, frankly, huge and incredibly remote. Even in the UK, our experience or exposure to farms was generally once a week. We'd all get bussed out to Langford, which was about 30 minutes outside of Bristol, and even then, only about a quarter of the year would actually get to go to the farm that particular week. So very, very limited farm exposure. Now, for most people, that then meant that you were relying on extramural studies time. So during our holidays, we'd be on placements. And that's a bit hit and miss, because depending on the placement quality would depend on how much experience you got. So what Dr. Stuart Barber at Melbourne University decided to do was, if students can't go to the farm, he's going to bring the farm to the students. And what this does is it allows them to go on a virtual tour of various different farming systems and learn about these systems from the safety of the vet school. Now, they've intentionally made this sort of screen-based just at the moment to allow more people to gain access to it, but there's no reason why this couldn't easily be ported to a VR system for even more immersiveness. In terms of non-directly veterinary examples, but more sort of animal-specific examples, VR is actually used in pure research. So Fremo VR is a system that uses screens to create sort of virtual environments in sort of live animal behavioural studies. So, for example, one example on your left there is this study is looking at how mice respond to perceived height. So what the researcher is able to do is that panel underneath the round walkway, they can actually change the checkerboard pattern dynamically to simulate different perceived heights. And what they found out was that, in fact, mice don't like walking over areas that seem to be a lot higher, so they'll tend to refrain from going over the small checkerboards. Quite how useful that knowledge is, I'm not quite sure, but it's kind of a cool use case of VR. Another example, so the other one is actually they're studying the behavior of flies, so free-flying flies, and in response to changing environmental factors. Again, quite what the value of it is, I don't know, but again, I'm sure the researchers had something in mind. Education and awareness are two very important use cases of VR, and one example is National Geographic in the UK have created this experience in the eyes of the animal where users can basically see the forest from, and it's not going to work. So the idea is you can see the forest through the eyes of various different species, from an owl right the way through to a frog. So it's part sort of art installation, part educational experience. But if this were to work, and if you want afterwards I can show you the video, it seems that frogs see the forest in quite a psychedelic form. It's pretty cool. And they actually installed this in various forest locations around the UK. So to add to the immersiveness of the experience. Another example is zoos. So, for example, Seattle Zoo are using virtual reality to add additional information on top of their traditional sort of zoo exhibits. So, for example, here, imagine visiting the elephant enclosure and wanting to learn more about elephants actually in the wild. Well, not everyone can travel to Africa to go on safari, so the beauty of VR is you can be transported to a certain degree to there and maybe learn more about elephants in their actual environment. Now, of course, all of us would prefer all animals to be out in the wild and not be in zoos. But I think that well-run zoos and good zoos, such as San Diego and Seattle, actually do a very good job, and I think being able to bring people close to animals and learn about animals does then, I think, have an impact on how animals in the wild sort of then do. Activism is another sort of example of where VR is being used with enthusiasm. So PETA, for example, the animal rights organization, they have an experience called, I think this is Eye to Eye, where users sit down and are able to speak in real time with a rabbit. And what that rabbit does is then takes the person, asks a series of questions and takes them through a range of scenarios which shows how some animals in captivity, what they go through. Now, even just watching the YouTube video, it kind of had an impact on me because VR is an incredibly empathic medium. And I must admit, I came away, even just from watching the video, thinking about some of my choices and maybe think about some of these issues. Another example is, I think it's the cameras to show people sort of various aspects of livestock rearing and the food production process. Some of which we don't necessarily think about or see, and again, that can help inform people about some of the decisions they make about products they buy or lifestyle choices. So, very impactful technology. In terms of augmented reality, so we'll change tack now. Most of the examples I've seen for veterinary are anatomy teaching tools. So Easy Anatomy, which we referred to earlier, they have an augmented reality version. But there's one example which I hope this works, is IVALA, which is part of VIN, which is the Veterinary Information Network. And this was actually set up by a friend of mine who, there we go, a friend from vet school, and they produce incredibly detailed three-dimensional models of sort of animal anatomy. For example, here we're looking at the dog heart, and this is in my apartment. This was filmed in my apartment, so you can explore and you just look at the detail. It's incredible. Now, it's one thing looking at it through a phone, but one of the beauties of this is to then look at it through a pair of smart glasses or one of the mixed reality headsets like Meta 2 or the HoloLens, where this really then comes to life because then they've got that incredible interactivity. So other examples, I haven't found very many augmented reality examples that are specifically veterinary, but I think that'll change in the future. A lot of them now are looking at just general education. So there are lots of games and books and things that use augmented reality to for example, teach kids in an interesting manner. And I've got a few apps on my phone. For example, there's one which is a shark experience, which enables you to place a shark in your room and feed it. It's frivolous fun. I'm not sure what it necessarily teaches you, but these are just examples of where we are at the moment with this technology, and I'm sure as people get more used to it, there are going to be more ideas for how this can actually be applied and more useful to education. yeah, it wasn't very hungry. For me, I think until we've got ubiquitous smart glasses, that's where I think AR, especially in a veterinary context, it's not going to sort of be, we're not going to see any leaps and bounds. I think it'll be human medicine that will really kind of show us the way. I think they'll be the first to adopt, adopt these devices. And I think recently in America, the FDA actually approved the use of the HoloLens Microsoft headset for use in medical, I think, pre-surgical planning. So that's quite a major step. So this technology is starting to be embraced now by mainstream healthcare. Okay. So in terms of where we're going in the future, for me and for the majority of the veterinary profession, education and training are really where the value of this technology lies. I can see it making a huge impact on learning, or supplementing the traditional learning systems, and even interviews. So some of the vet schools in the UK, for example, use multiple mini interviews as part of their recruitment, where students go along to various small stations. Now I could imagine them using augmented reality or virtual reality to test sort of applicants on a range of different situations. For example, placing them into maybe an ethical quandary and seeing how they react. Or, VR systems, I think, are going to be able to maybe monitor their response and provide much more meaningful feedback than a classic 20-minute interview with 3 sort of old vets in front of them. So I also think it's going to be the students themselves who bring this technology into the vet school. There are some schools that are already trying this technology out, but really a lot of budgets just aren't there, and they're not willing to sort of dive in to make the investment that's needed. But I think with low-cost headsets such as the Oculus Go and the Oculus Quest next year, I think more and more students themselves are going to be embracing this technology and then introducing it into the curriculum, and then showing the vet schools where that's where the value is. I'm going to speed up a bit. We're running out of time. So could the future, what is the future of veterinary education? Now, could it be that vet schools in the future will actually be virtual? If you can do a lot of this practical training using VR, then what's to say you couldn't go to vet school from anywhere in the world? And, will people be going to vet school in the Oasis rather than necessarily attending vet or medical school in Harvard or Bristol or wherever the traditional vet schools are based? So you could argue that it might also open up access to these professions as well, which I don't think is a bad thing. Now, this is probably one of the most important. So one of the things that veterinarians and doctors have to do a lot of is CPD, continuing professional development, keeping skills fresh and learning new procedures. Now, at the moment, the way we generally would do that, so for example, if I wanted to learn a new procedure on a dog knee, I would typically attend a course. Going to take maybe three days. It's going to involve me leaving the clinic, probably usually traveling to some specific location. So there's the cost of that, the time away from the clinic. It's then going to involve some lecturing and then maybe some practical time as well. Now the problem with the practical time is, great, you're doing hands-on work, but a lot of the time it's going to be on models or dissection specimens, and you're often going to be sharing with other professionals. The problem with a model or a dissection specimen is once you've made that cut, there's no reset button. So there's no way of then sort of going back and repeating the experience over and over and over again. So they're often incredibly expensive as well, usually several hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And the problem is they then rely on you getting back to the clinic and then having the cases available to then carry on developing your skills. The problem is no one, the vets themselves, and also the clients understandably like the idea of Pookie the poodle there being the first patient that you've ever tried this procedure on. No one's really comfortable with that. So it's a source of great anxiety. And what often happens is it's often several weeks because you can't guarantee a flow of these particular cases to come in. So it's often hit and miss and sporadic to keep these skills up. And it can be many, many months before you might actually then get to do that procedure again, which then begs the question, you know, how effective are these courses at keeping people's skills as relevant as they could be? Now, for me, I could imagine a much better scenario where I actually just, during a lunch break, put on my VR headset, spend 10 minutes or so just running through a procedure. Bam, I've just done some CPD. I haven't had to travel anywhere. I've run through the procedures I'm going to do tomorrow. I've reminded myself of the actual process, some of the risks that are associated, some of the things that might go wrong, so I'm prepared. And because I've actually done the procedure itself, I've got that muscle memory instilled as well. So VR for CPD and practical training, it seems obvious it's going to be, you know, this technology is going to be having a huge impact on how we train. And the beauty is, no animals were harmed in the process of me doing that training, But what needs to happen to get us there? Well, first of all, we need better content. So at the moment, there isn't a lot of compelling, high-quality, interactive content. The problem is content costs money to create, and you need a market for that content. And no one's going to invest in making that content if the market isn't there, the demand isn't there. Now, in terms of the market, a lot of people who try VR, specifically VR, get it and are sort of real advocates for it. But the problem is it's access to headsets. I think a lot of it is, before it's been cost. I think that's changing now with the introduction of cheaper, low-cost headsets rather. But it's also still the form factor. People generally don't like putting on bulky headsets, and a lot of the time people buy these expensive systems and use them for a few months, but then inevitably they seem to then end up getting used less and less and less, because we can still do most of the things that we need to on our smartphones or tablets. I've found that as well. So I think the form factor needs to change and will change. For example, smart glasses that are, you know, that are stylish, that have great content and you don't mind wearing. So Apple, for example, it'll be interesting to see what they come out with, because they might be the company that are going to make smart glasses, augmented reality suddenly go mainstream. So there's an interactivity between these two factors. This is what we need. We really need our brave individuals and brave organizations to say, yeah, I'm going to back this technology. I can see this is where the future's going, and we're going to invest in creating more content. So in terms of where can we go in the future? I mean, does anyone have any ideas on how you see VR and AR sort of impacting animals? There might be some of you thinking about, well, maybe animals are going to be wearing VR headsets themselves. This is an example which I actually thought this is real as well to begin with. This is a project called Second Livestock, which I thought was a fantastically clever play on the Second Life concept. This was developed by, so I'm just going to check the name, yes, a professor at Iowa State, Austin Stewart, who proposed an idea that battery hens could wear VR headsets to, you know, improve their lives, because their lives are pretty sucky. It's amazing how many people actually thought this was a real life project. I think he probably has too much time on his hands, but it's an interesting idea. I mean, maybe he's onto something. In a lot of ways, you could argue that we are already using some of this technology to improve animals' lives. Environmental enrichment, for example, we're already doing that in zoos to make animals feel a little bit more like they're in their own environments. And I could see maybe some elements of VR and AR being applied in those contexts. So who knows? Maybe this isn't as far-fetched as it seems at the moment. For me, some of the best value is going to be in social VR and augmented reality. So enabling veterinarians and other professionals to work together and not necessarily being in the same space. So you can imagine perhaps a more senior veterinarian training a less experienced surgeon on the other side of the world in a procedure, or collaborating across different clinics in planning a procedure or discussing a particularly complex case. Now, having tried out social VR at Oculus last year, I was a little bit skeptical, but I actually got to try it, and my friend was in the room next door, and suddenly we were in the same room and we were able to sort of, I mean, it's frivolous, shooting ray guns at each other and shrinking each other and playing ping pong. It was awesome, and that made me, a light bulb went off in my head and thought, okay, I can see the benefits of this in a professional context for interacting with, with colleagues and not just, shooting them with a ray gun. So what's my specific vision? Why do I give a damn about all this? Well, really what I personally want to do is develop virtual reality training applications for veterinarians, to train them and enable them to just get better at their jobs and improve animal welfare. So I want to take veterinary professionals from this situation where they're stressed and anxious about a particular procedure that perhaps they haven't done for several months, and there's a lot at stake. People are more inclined to sue us these days as well, so you really want to make sure that you're bringing your A game to anything that you do in practice. So I want to change from this situation to this situation. As I said, taking the time, a couple of hours between clinics, run through the procedure, no setup, you just throw on your headset and, no stress. And if you want, you can bring the nursing team in as well. They could join you in VR and just run through things, make sure everyone's absolutely clued up as to what they're going to do. It's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. Let's come back in 10 years' time and this is the way this stuff is going to get taught. I'm certain of it. So some of my visions of the future look a little bit like this. There would normally be some awesome music going along with this as well, but ironically, technology is not really working for us at the moment. In terms of augmented reality, this is something I just knocked up yesterday, actually. So, for example, imagine that you could just go in and pick various different animals. You're probably never going to get to operate on a dragon, for example, but the principles are the same. So why not practice that neutering procedure on a dragon or a unicorn or a tiger? Just makes learning a little bit more fun. So, in conclusion, as I say, virtual reality and augmented reality, whilst they're not necessarily going to be applied directly to animals, I don't think we're going to be seeing a scene such as this one anytime soon. It's, as I said, it's the indirect, the impact on education and training of professionals who are then going to be having direct impact on those pets. That's where I think the real value of VR and AR is going to be. That concludes this part of the main part of the talk. If anyone wants to take 5 minutes to go for a loo break, or you want to scuttle off now, that's fine. The next thing we're going to do is just spend literally a few minutes just sort of looking at some of the insights and the lessons that I've gleaned from sort of the last 3 months. Do you want a break, or do you just want to crack on and finish? Yeah? Okay, it's not going to take long. Okay, so Vancouver, beautiful place, and I'm really, I don't want to leave. Anyone recognize where this photo was taken? It's top of Grouse Mountain, sort of looking down at UBC. Now, I came to Vancouver, sort of took 3 months off work to come here, specifically to learn about VR and AR and specifically development. main reason I chose Vancouver was it has this reputation as being a global hub for VR and AR. I mean, a large part of that is because it's got a fantastic sort of history of special effects and film. Now, I initially came over to join a course, which for reasons that I won't bore you with didn't work out, so I actually ended up leaving the course and going solo. So I've been learning sort of independently for the past 3 months, and to be honest, it's made me realize that there's so many fantastic resources out there to help you learn these skills that and amazing opportunities to meet people that it was actually the best thing I could have done. So I probably should go back and thank them for their crappy course. Because without it, I probably wouldn't have come out to Vancouver. So in terms of some of the lessons that I've learned, so in terms of VR and AR specifically, I'd say the first lesson is there's really no need to spend a fortune on trying to develop these skills. Most of what I've learned has actually been through some really inexpensive Udemy courses, which ironically a virtual reality developer friend of mine, the guy in San Francisco, sort of suggested to me before I moved out here. $12 for these courses, and honestly it's taught me most of what I need to know. Now, there's definitely some advantages, though, of being based in somewhere where you physically sort of congregate around people. That's why hubs like, tech hubs like Silicon Valley exist. We're social creatures. And there are plenty of opportunities to do that. So, for example, the Emerging Media Lab here, it's one example of places you can go to actually meet people and discuss ideas, and they're very supportive in helping people sort of with their own projects. There are other examples here in Vancouver. There's BC Tech's The Cube, there's Launch Academy, all of which are available and are great places to go and meet. But the point is, you can do a lot of the learning very, very inexpensively, maybe even often for free, by using sort of online resources and joining forums and things like that. Developing some core knowledge. I mean, one thing I've realized, I'm not going to be the greatest VR or AR developer ever. I just know that. But what I've feel that's been important and what I've taken away is I now have some literacy in the technology. What that enables me to do is I now feel I can actually sort of engage with developers who are a lot more nerdy and a lot smarter than I am, and actually be able to build something with them. Because I don't think it's realistic for me that I'm going to build my vision on my own. I'm going to need people to sort of do it. Because I think if I try to do it on my own, I don't think it's going to be good enough. I think it's going to take me too long. And I think my skills lie elsewhere in, maybe things like marketing. But now I feel I can actually engage with developers and speak their language, which is important. Networking. It's got a bit of a negative connotation associated with the word, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be fun, and it's really, really important. There are so many opportunities here in Vancouver to network with people in VR and AR. I mean, the meetups galore. As I said, there are all these various hubs that host events. In fact, there's one even next week going down, I think, at Launch Academy. And I've tried to get to as many as I can. So things like Van VR. My mind's gone blank, but there are lots. So the only way that you're not going to be able to sort of take advantage of that is if you basically just sit at home and don't try. There are so many opportunities, and I urge you to get out there and really sort of make the most of the incredible network that there is out here. And build something. So just start building. And I think that goes hand in hand with just developing some core knowledge. No one's expecting you to sort of build the most amazing product straight away, but if you can just put something together that you can showcase to people, then that will start to get people excited about your project. And and that's something that I'm working on now, and I'm excited to actually sort of start putting something together. As I said, it's probably going to be pretty crappy, but I think if I can at least produce something that's sort of vaguely demoable, then I think it'll help people get a little bit more behind the vision. In terms of just general life advice or life tips that I've picked up, well, this will be quick. take risks and embrace uncertainty. As I said, I came out here with one particular aim, which was to join this course, and that didn't work out. But you know what? It was a blessing in disguise, because it meant I was then able to set my own agenda, travel, do things like this. So yeah, sometimes shit happens and you've just got to embrace it and roll with it. So I think that's quite an important lesson. Trust your gut. Pause and trust your gut. You know, if something seems too good to be true, generally it is. But having said that, sometimes not trusting your gut can lead to positive things, because I think if I trusted my gut, I wouldn't have come to Vancouver, and I wouldn't have got to, you know, meet you guys and get involved with what's going on here in Vancouver. So sometimes, you know, sometimes it helps not to listen, but generally trust your gut. It normally pays dividends. And last week I was in Banff, so I urge you, visit the mountains. They're awesome here in Vancouver. Anyone been up to the Rockies? Do it. It's, oh my God, it's incredible. And if you're looking for inspiration for VR and AR experiences, then that is the place to get inspiration. You know, it comes in just floods. So yeah, visit the mountains. That would be one of my bits of advice. Excellent. Thank you for giving me your attention.